him, Spider-Man, and the Human Torch would hang out, and they're actually buddies
Mm-hmm.
in the comic book world. They're, I guess, of the same age, and they have kind of the same, but they hang out, and they both like cracking jokes and stuff like that. And there is more than one writer that has gone. It's like, have you ever noticed that there's so many people, so many superheroes in New York, but there's really none of us are around when you really need us. It's like, the Human Torch goes, yeah, I know, right?
Well, and then there's gosh, what was it? I'm not sure if you heard about this, but like Chris Evans is basically trying to get back into the MCU, but as Johnny Storm.
That
Yeah,
would be brilliant.
yeah, no, because
So, can you imagine if they bring Chris Evans back and they just have this running gag? It's like, you look like somebody I used to
oh,
know.
yeah, I'm the Human Torch. No, that's not it.
Yep.
Just to have people run up. Oh my God, it's Captain America! No,
No.
I'm not him.
Thank you. Exactly. Story by Osmosis is talking about, saying about it. I'm doing a one-shot graphic novel. Would love any experience or insight into creating something strong for a new species. Been following James Gurney's imaginative realism, but it's mostly just building on an idea with half a dozen sketches in different mediums so far.
So what I usually do is I'm a firm believer in world building. So I think that what made Star Wars and Star Trek and even things like Mad Max and whatnot so good was that before the characters existed, the environment they lived in existed. So the world was created, and essentially, George would sit down and be like, okay, well, I want to tell the story of King Arthur, in space as a Western. And so he had like this world aesthetic that it was going to be okay, kind of spaghetti westernish, but I really want it to be a sci-fi, like 2000, like a based kind of Flash Gordon adventure, but with like 2001 Space Odyssey kind of aesthetics. And so he would actually visually create the world, then he would create the characters and how they interact with that world. And I tend to think that that's a more realistic approach to creating aliens. I'm designing a video game right now with Richard Garfield. Um, uh, and that's
Creator of Magic the Gathering.
that's pretty much all I can say about that project. But I'll say, essentially, what I'm working on right now with my character designs is we literally have descriptions of the worlds that each of the characters came from and their environments. And so I would have things like, oh, well, if this race, is from this type of planet with this type of thing, and they're the top of the food chain with absolutely no competition at all, they wouldn't wear clothes. And everybody's kind of like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah, they would be like kind of like the New Zealand Maori. Like there's essentially, there's no threat against them. So Polynesians and New Zealander, the Aboriginal New Zealanders and whatnot, basically walked around with pretty much a loincloth, and that was it. They had no reason to wear armor. And and the human sense of humility and of modesty, of having to cover themselves up, essentially came from the idea that you had to wear armor and protect yourself from threats, and then
Well, the
eventually,
elements.
yeah, and the elements, and it came from this whole growing concept essentially throughout our evolution, of protection. And so we started wearing clothes, whereas people who weren't bothered by the sun didn't wear as much clothes because they didn't have to hide their skin from the sun. People who weren't, and honestly, like if you think of like even African tribes or whatnot, they have shields and spears and things like that. But they're, again, even though they're dealing with things like large mammals like lions that will hunt them down, most of the time the lions leave them alone because they know humans can fight back. Especially if they see, somebody coming at them with a shield and a spear. So, and again, they also need to move fast and stuff like that. So it's like trying to take the environment that person lives in, that character lives in, and then design around that, or even trying to give the story if you see something you think is cool. Like, oh, I want this guy to have, like a giant rock kind of, like his fists are like stone. It's like, cool, maybe he walks on his hands, maybe he uses his hands as, as something so that they callus up almost like rocks. And so you would use logic like that in creating the characters. So even if you have a visual idea that you want to expand on, come up with the story as to why that's there. And the reason that helps is because now you have a baseline in which to create other stuff, so there's consistency. And I think that that's the problem. Things like, Jupiter Ascending and stuff like that, they kind of just created characters that look cool with no backstory. Like, there was no reason for people to have abilities or do things, or, even what was the world of 1,000, planet of 1,000 cities, or...
Yeah, Planet of 1,000 Cities.
Yeah, so...
Valorant.
What's that?
I was thinking Valorant.
Valorant, yeah, Valorant. So yeah, it's that same thing there. It really was underdeveloped. There's all these cool looking things, but there's really no reason for them.
Right.
And so the audience kind of gets lost. And so I think